Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles had such a huge cultural impact on... Wait, what? Oh, we're calling it Ninja now. Right. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had such a huge cultural impact in the 1980s and 90s. There were comic books, a TV show, movies, toys, video games. I mean, it was everywhere. Sure, it's still culturally relevant today, but if you were a child in the 90s and had never heard of this franchise, you would have to have been living under a rock or something. Now when it comes to 90s Ninja Turtles games, most people would think of the NES or the SNES ones. But when I was growing up, mine were the ones released for the Nintendo Game Boy, the first and the second one. There was of course a third, but I didn't even know this one existed until years later, when I discovered it on a multi-cart I bought on holiday. I do have all three original cartridges now, but since we now have the Cowabunga collection available to us, I'm going to play these games in high definition, and not on my Super Game Boy. The first game is your basic beat 'em up. It's not a top-down perspective like in Double Dragon, where you move in all directions in fake 3D. Instead, you only move simply from left to right, while trying to defend yourself from enemies coming in both directions. Now a first timer may look at this and think it looks a bit bland and nothing special. But seriously, there is just something about this game when you play it, specifically when killing your enemies. When you hit them, they kind of just like disintegrate into nothing. And when I hear those sharp, explosive sound effects when I kill something, it's like music to my ears. As for the difficulty, this game is reasonably easy, especially as it only has 5 stages. Plus you can choose which level you want to start with. But when I was a kid, I really liked having this option, because I usually struggled playing a whole Game Boy game in one go without turning it off. And yes, I know what you're about to say, that I can save my progress on the Cowabunga collection. But remember, we didn't have that luxury back in the day. These particular games had no save feature, so being able to choose your stage was a welcome addition. The second game is a little different. Unlike the first one, you can't pick the level, so that of course made it a little harder to do the entire game in one go. But that didn't matter too much, because it made up for it with some major improvements. For one thing, they actually took the time to animate part of the show's title sequence into the start of the game. So awesome! Also, on the character selection screen, you can actually see the pictures of the turtles and what weapons they use. I mean, it's certainly a lot better than what we'd got here. When I was a kid, this part where you start the game always got me really hyped up. Also, another reason this part was so great was because hearing an actual voice come out of an 8-bit video game was pretty rare. It was certainly the first time I ever heard actual talking in a Game Boy game at the time. And it happens again when you pause the game too. By the way, the music in this game is top notch, and Konami knew what they had too, because they programmed a way to play the tracks on demand in the options menu. That's pretty cool. Most of the levels are platformer levels like the first one, but some parts are in that Double Dragon style, which really adds some variety. With that said, my favourite stage in the entire game would have to be the second one, where you get to ride a skateboard. It's a lot of fun, and the music is just the icing on the cake. Now the third game is very different to the first two, more specifically the fact that it's a non-linear game. Some refer to this style as Metroidvania, where the player would not have to beat individual levels, but have a whole world to explore, heading in multiple directions, often backtracking, and of course getting incredibly lost. You can imagine this would have been an issue back in 1993. This is definitely the kind of game you'd need to save your progress. You can, however, input a password, but it's a very long and tedious process to type into a Game Boy. Okay fine, it isn't that bad, but there's just no way to remember that many digits by heart. Imagine being a child playing your Game Boy in the car or something, and discovering that you needed to remember a password. When it comes to handheld systems especially, the last thing you want to do is to stop playing your game so you can write something down. On top of that, if you come back to it after a couple of weeks and pick up where you left off, it is very hard to remember which direction you're supposed to go right away. I mean, I know this is just what platform adventure games are all about, but I personally didn't feel it meshed as well with the other two, although I do admire Konami for trying something new. Plus it's a long game, so you definitely get your money's worth. It is by far the most difficult of the three, but it is a nice and refreshing challenge. Overall, I believe it's a solid trilogy. They may all be vastly different from one another, but that's what's so good about them. Kind of like the original Super Mario Bros. Trilogy. Each one is a unique experience that stands out on its own as a great game in its own right.